but there is a unique kind of energy that comes from whatever that point is of saying, I've had enough.
I was able to evoke the sense of what it feels like to be in a place that feels environmentally hostile.
I'm sure you've read, so many books that have made you feel a particular way, and what a privilege that is to be, hopefully, to be able to do that to somebody else. So
I just found myself blazing through those scenes because it was so fun. I listen to music, and when I know I'm having fun is when I'm writing, and I also start singing to the music. I don't know, it feels like a full body, like, joy.
I'm a terrible worrier, and was as a child, which is a kind of exercising of your imagination, or a strengthening of it in some ways, and you become very used to sort of looking at things consequentially in a certain pattern.
All of these books that are also considered Westerns that exist within the same realm of bringing stories to light that previously have not been. And if that's what the Western has become, then I'm happy to be a part of the new Western.
Running since 2016, the prize supports and celebrates the best adventure writing of the last year. Celebrates adventure fiction as a genre, from the books on the shortlist to the writers who write them and the readers who read them. And the librarians and library staff who we work with to select the long and short lists look for the novels which both honour the traditions of adventure and those which are unafraid to try something new. And both of these novels that we're discussing tonight delighted us in such unexpected ways. There are moments that are not easy to read, both set in incredibly violent times, but we wholeheartedly root for their protagonists. The courage, resilience, and endurance they both show is immense, and they both manage their journeys with strength, charisma, and sometimes a little humour. And as for the adventure, sometimes you choose it, and sometimes it chooses you. And both of these, and one of the reasons that we've paired these two novels and their authors together, are novels that trace a life, and they are definitely ones where the adventure sweeps up the character and they have no choice but to go along with it. And now we get to meet the two fantastic authors. So Jenny, I'm going to come to you first. If you could give us a brief introduction to yourself, tell us where you're joining us from, and I believe you've got a reading ready for us too.
Thank you, Georgina. Hi, everyone. My name is Jenny Tinghui Zhang. I am coming to you from Austin, Texas, the deep south of America. And I will just be reading the first few paragraphs from my book. And I'm sorry, I have the US version with me, but the UK version has a special place in my heart because that cover was actually the first cover we decided upon for the US version, actually, and then we switched it over to this. So yay for the UK version. Okay. When I am kidnapped, it does not happen in an alleyway. It does not happen in the middle of the night. It does not happen when I am alone. When I am kidnapped, I am 13 and standing in the middle of the Zhifu fish market on Beach Road, watching a fleshy woman assemble white fish the shape of spades into a pile. The woman squats, her knees in her armpits, rearranging the fish so the best ones rise to the top. Around us, a dozen fishmongers do the same, their own piles of fish suspended in nets, squirming. Below the nets are pails to catch the water sliding off fish bodies. The ground is glossy with water from the ones that are not yet dead. When they flail in the air, they gleam like silver firecrackers. The whole place smells wet and raw. Someone yells about red snapper. Fresh, they say, straight from the Gulf of Peicili. Another voice tumbles over that one, louder, brighter. Real shark fin, boost sexual potency, make skin better, increase energy for your little emperor. This is poetry to the house servants who came to the fish market for their masters. Bodies surge in the direction of the shark fin voice, knocking and grinding for the promise of a promotion, of rank advancement, of favorability. It could all rest on the quality of shark fin. While the others clamor, I remain staring at the fish woman who continues to rearrange her pile. Her fish are not in a net like the others, but laid out on a tarp. At her shuffling, loose fish slide down from the top of the heap to the tarp's edge, where they remain vulnerable and unattended. Hunger presses against the walls of my stomach. It would be so easy to snatch one. And the time it takes for me to approach, grab the fish farthest from her, and sprint away, the woman would barely be able to rise to her feet. I finger the silver pieces in my pants before letting them fall back into the lining. This money should be saved, not wasted on some limp fish. I would just take one or two, nothing she could not make up the next day. The ocean holds plenty. But by the time I decide, the fish woman has noticed me. She knows immediately who I am, sees the gnawing in my belly, an insistence that hollows all the things it touches. My body betrays me. It is as thin as a reed. She recognizes what she sees in all the urchins who dare slide into the fish market. And before I can look away, she is in front of me, body heaving. What do you want? Her eyes are narrowed. She flaps at me, hands the size of pans. I duck one, then two blows. Away, away, she yells. Behind her, the whitefish wait in their pile, glistening. There is still time to grab a few and run away. But the rest of the market has noticed us by now. And I'll stop there.
Fabulous. Thank you so much. I think we knew from the moment that we read that opening line, "When I am kidnapped," that this book was going to be something that captures you from the very beginning. Paddy, I'm going to come over to you now as well. If you could give us a quick introduction and treat us to a reading from My Name Is Yip, that would be great.
Thank you very much. I'm Paddy Crewe. I'm joining you from, although I live in London, I've returned to my native region of the northeast of England. And I'll be reading from the hardback today, which I despise, so I can't say I'm delighted to be reading from it. But anyway, here we go. I'm going to read from the beginning. My name is Yip Tolroy, and I'm a mute. I have made not a sound since the day of my birth, October 2nd, 1815. I will say that my life has been something of a trial, but such is God's wish, and so I must tell my story here on the page. Indeed, I should thank him for these 3 fingers left me. They might still hold a quill and feel the ink flow free beneath them. I did leave them other 2 where they lay, and I have dreams still of the rains feeding them like green tipped shoots, where in that spot now stands a hand, the wrist a smooth barked bowl, and 100 fingers wagging like branches in the breeze. Answers have not ever come easy to me. By all accounts, there's like teeth. You can try pull them out, but even then they will likely splinter and crack, and there will be nothing but a palmful of dust at the end of it. Here is a lesson worth attending to. No one or thing comes into this world whole, and it is in the search of what is gone missing that our lives do find their meaning. That is the truth of it. At one time, a great many beardy doctors did apply their crude instruments to me, though none was able to declare a reason behind my queer afflictions. I ought to make it plain I am not cut from the common cloth. Aside from my lacking a voice, I stand at 4 feet and 8 inches tall, and there is inexplicably not a single hair on my person. Some have been willing to look upon my differences as mere eccentricities, though the majority have not been so generous with their opinions. I never did quarrel with them who chose to insult me, and I did not simper up to them who chose to treat me with civility. It is not my business to decide how others wish to comport themselves. Only know that I have grown to look upon my own reflection in kind, for there is no hatred more pernicious than that which is turned upon the self. There we are.
Thank you so much, Paddy. That's certainly left all of us wanting more. And we are absolutely going to talk about the character of Yip and the voice that you've created for him later, but I won't launch into that right now. I will start, Jenny, you gave us a quick introduction to yourself, but if I could start by asking for a quick introduction about Four Treasures of the Sky and where the inspiration for it came from, that would be great.
Sure, yeah. So Four Treasures of the Sky, it's about this young Chinese girl named Dai, but the way that this book came to me was from my father. And I write about this in the afterword of the book, but basically for his job back in 2014, he was driving through Idaho, which is a state in the United States. And he saw this historical marker on the side of the road that said something about a Chinese hanging tree. And so he stopped and read it, and it detailed an event in 1885 where 5 Chinese men were hanged by local vigilantes for the alleged murder of a local store owner. And so my dad was thinking, it wasn't knowledge to him at the time why Chinese people would be in Idaho in 1885. To his knowledge, they did not exist there. And so he took that story back to me and asked me, knowing that I'm a writer, if I could kind of write him the story of what happened to these 5 Chinese men. What were they doing there? What happened that led to their hanging? And of course, eventually, when I was in my MFA program years later, I thought about this question of his, and that's where this book slowly started forming. I looked into this story of these 5 Chinese men, the news events of the time, and kind of worked my way backwards from there, eventually finding my way to this Chinese girl named Dai, who I created. But that's kind of how the entire thing spawned, was from my father's curiosities.
How long do you think it took you from that moment to the actual moment of publication?
Well, my father told me this story in 2014. I didn't take it seriously as a request of his until 2019. It was the last semester of my MFA program, and I was in a novel writing workshop, and this was the only thing that was interesting to me. And then it took me maybe a year and a half to get the story down on paper, another few months to revise it, and then we sold it from there.
And how easy was it for you to get the story out into the world once you'd completed that manuscript, that journey to publication?
It was actually quite seamless, I would say. Everything happened rather quickly. I think the turnaround from going on submission to signing with an editor was maybe like within a week. So I feel extremely lucky and grateful that it was such a smooth process for me. Yeah.
That's brilliant. Paddy, I saw your face there, so I'm going to come and ask you exactly the same questions. But we'll start with the inspiration. Where did that idea for My Name Is Yip come from?
Well, nothing anywhere near as tangible as Jenny's. I think if you're sort of treating inspiration as not this kind of immediate whole idea, which it certainly wasn't for me, but a kind of drip feed. Coming from the Northeast, I'd wanted, or I felt like I didn't want to sort of subscribe to that idea of, I don't know, I thought people would sort of, if I was going to write anything, people would anticipate a kind of kitchen sink drama, rightly or wrongly. I don't know whether that's unfair, but I sort of wanted to get as far away from that as possible. So I sort of was looking around it, and I came across this sort of, I'd never heard of it before. I think everybody has heard of the California gold rush, but there was a gold rush in Georgia a little earlier in the century. And I think, probably like a lot of first-time novelists, I was looking for somewhere to kind of to hang my hat in that seemed like my own territory, that I could really put my name down. And then sort of slowly, as you looking into that, and then various other things start to happen. And I started it with a female narrator. And then I've told this story before, but I don't even know whether it's true anymore. I think it is. But I was watching Wallace and Gromit, and I don't know whether Jenny knows Wallace and Gromit, but there is a sort of, yeah, you do. Gromit can't speak, so I suddenly gave this female narrator a sort of mute sidekick, and then as I progressed through the novel, I sort of thought, or started to think, how interesting it would be to try and communicate with this other character, Yip, who I'd created. So I then went back to the beginning and started all over again. I think that's about it.
How long did it take you to get Yip out into the world?
Probably about 3 years, I would think. I started writing it when I was 26, and I was in my final year at university. So I'd gone to university a little later, or revisited it. Yeah, and then probably about, I would say about 3 years. I think I was 29 by the time it had been bought. Yeah, not quite as seamless, I don't think, as Jenny's, but relatively seamless, considering some of the horror stories you do hear. I think it sounds like we were both very fortunate.
Absolutely. And they're both very strong books, so very wise people who picked them up. Paddy, I've got one question in that I'm going to have to ask you, because you've despised the hardback. Can you tell us why?
It's one of those things I probably shouldn't say. I just didn't. I have no affection for it as a sort of piece. I much prefer the you've got the paperback. I much prefer the paperback.
They're both absolutely beautiful covers, both of these.
I don't know. It was one of those ones where sort of time was running out, and it sort of didn't quite come together in the end, and it was all a little bit rushed. But it is what it is. So there we are.
Absolutely. So for both of you, these are both your debut novels. I wondered what came first for you when writing. Was it the setting? Was it a character? Was it Yip or Dayu? And really, how would you describe that writing process for you? Jenny, I'll come to you first with that.
Yeah, I think, I mean, the story that my dad told me, that was kind of the foundation that I started from. And initially I had wanted to explore each of these 5 men's lives and their experiences, similar to how Barbara Kingsolver does it in the Poisonwood Bible, where she kind of follows each member of that family. And so I wanted to be with each of the 5 men. So I started from a character named Nelson, who actually appears in the second half of the book. I started writing with him from his, it was in third person at the time. I wrote maybe 50, 70 pages of his life and his experience. And around that time, I also found scholarship about how Chinese people were getting to the States in the 1880s, because the Chinese Exclusion Act had gone into place, which meant that Chinese people couldn't come over to the United States anymore. So I was seeing that to get girls and women over, they would smuggle them in buckets of coal, put them in crates of china, ship them across the ocean to San Francisco. And once I found that piece of scholarship, I imagined this young girl in such an environment, and I just wanted to write her story and follow her for a little bit. So I started writing the person who is now Dayu, I started writing with that character in mind. And I found that, unlike when I was writing the third person voice from Nelson's perspective, this character and this voice, it just flowed so easily. It happened so fast. I didn't really question anything about it. It just felt incredibly smooth and like, this is what I was supposed to do. So a little bit similar to Paddy's experience of starting with a different character and wanting to explore this other side, what was then a side character. I had the same experience of jumping to a new character and following that voice.
Jenny, I think you had a question for Paddy as well that leads on quite nicely about how he structured his book.
Oh yeah, so I read your book, Paddy, and I thought it was brilliant. I noticed, it's a narrative, as are stories, but the chapters kind of have an episodic feel to them, which I recognize is also a trait of, I guess, that genre of book, like a Western, or what used to be called dime store novels, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I was curious, as a writer, how did you approach the structuring of, I guess, the actual writing of the book itself, in thinking about, did you kind of have a goal with each chapter? Were you writing it chapter by chapter, or were you thinking about it holistically of like, this is the entire journey and this is what I want to do? I guess my question is, how did you approach the piecing together of the story?
I think as I approach anything when I'm writing, without having any idea what I'm doing, that to me is a really sort of enjoyable place to be. And the only reason, I don't know whether you're the same, but if you did know the ending, I would struggle to get there, because you a sort of common misconception about writing is that you're somehow the writer isn't actually involved in or invested in the story in the same way that the reader is, but I want to get there because I want to find out what happens. So yeah, I mean, as soon as it started, like, very similar to you, as soon I sort of muddled around for about 2.5 years. I was, working full time, and it was all sort of wasn't going very well. And I got to sort of breaking point. And I distinctly remember I went to see my brother, and we were in Peckham, and I said, I just can't do this anymore. I think I'm gonna have to do something else. And at least this seems to be the case for me, but there is a unique kind of energy that comes from whatever that point is, of saying, I've had enough. And you somehow, I don't know, there's a little bit of tension there, which gives you some kind of burst to then. So I sort of, as soon as I'd said I had enough, I sort of felt free of whatever I'd been sort of encumbered by the past 2 years. And I went back and I wrote pretty much word for word that first chapter. And then from that point on, as Jenny says, it was done within five months, maybe 6 months. And it seemed to be, once you got a hang of that voice, then it was, you were basically, not to sound too kind of numinous or mystical, but you are kind of following that voice, or that voice is leading you rather than the other way around. So yeah, I think that answers. Yeah, and then that sort of episodic nature, once that established itself, I imagine it's doing. But I can't remember it doing it sort of deliberately. But it helps. It certainly helps in terms of keeping that sort of narrative thrust going and keeping people on their toes. It is quite a nifty way of doing that.
Paddy, you talked a little bit about the voice there, and finding Yip and it's suddenly starting to flow, those opening chapters. Can you just tell us a little bit about Yip's voice and your writing style for this book? I know we had a little extract at the beginning, but if you could explain.
Basically, so Yip can't talk. So as the novel progresses, the reader will find it's not a great spoiler, but that he manages to communicate via a piece of slate and chalk, which he carries around on a sort of what he describes or calls a slate sling, which is a sort of piece of old horse tackle. And he is always communicating by writing. So with that in mind, he is sort of his writing style sort of sprang out from that certain things are going to be abbreviated. He's going to cut corners where he can to make it easier for himself. So there is a kind of practical element to it. But broadly speaking, I seem to go down a kind of heightened sort of poetic although I think it is authentic to some extent. There is a heightened sort of, I am taking a few liberties here and there, but yeah, it's an odd, I think some readers I know I find it a little bit difficult to get into because of it rhythmically. It's quite strange. There's not a great deal of punctuation, and what punctuation he does use is only the occasional comma and full stop. There's no more sort of sophistication than that. So I suppose now that I'm talking about, all these sort of things come into play when in creating a voice. They sort of, you're pulled one way or pulled another, and through these various things, something hopefully your own is kind of created.
Hey, what did you think of that as a reader when you read Paddy's book?
Oh my gosh, all I could think was how difficult it would have been to sustain that level of voice, it being like the absolute backbone of the book. So I was actually quite curious how you managed to do that. Were there little rituals that you would perform, such as like reading something or listening to music, or just like lighting a candle, whatever it is, to just slip into Yip's voice? Because obviously that is not the way you write. No. Having read your after or your acknowledgement section, right? Yeah. So I'm about
all of those things really. There were loads of rituals I had. I mean, it is difficult, but for example, I would never write. At the time I was living, my room at the time was too small to have a desk in, so I had begged my housemate at the time if I could write at her desk, and it was a sort of estate in Peckham that looked out over. So I would always draw the blinds, always have a small, either a candle lit or a small sort of dim lamp. I would have certain things to read before I started. In this sense, it does sound a lot like sort of you go sort of all Daniel Day-Lewis, sort of stepping into character. But it kind of is like that, because there would be no other way of doing it. You can't just come in from the cold and just start doing that. So yeah, a number of little things that I would do. But then again, as I was reading Jenny's book on the train this morning, part of me does sort of think it's a bit, it's almost harder to do. You can sort of sometimes you can sort of hide behind it's sort of more style than substance, which I was always famed for in my essays. That sometimes I think it looks, but actually, what Jenny's doing is no less difficult or no less impressive. It's just a slightly different way of going about it. But yeah.
Yeah, I think one of the interesting things, the Yip's voice is so prevalent and like really at the kind of front and center of My Name is Yip. And then Jenny, I think one of the things that's really kind of recurring front and center of Four Treasures of the Sky is how you incorporate both folklore and how you incorporate calligraphy as part of Dayu's story. And I think both of those serve as a tool for her to cope with the situation she's in, to find solace, to find explanations for things, sometimes to help her escape. And can you just tell us a little bit more about why you incorporated those two things and the relationship maybe between Dayu and her namesake?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so to give folks some background, Dayu, her name comes from a real character in Chinese literature. It's one of the 4 famous books of China. Everyone has read it. It's called Dream of the Red Chamber. And there's a character in that book called Lin Daiyu, and her character is extremely sensitive. She's a poet. She's sick from a very young age. Eventually, she dies of, I think it's consumption, I want to say, some sort of lung failure, I believe. But anyway, so Daiyu, the main character, is named after this character in this Chinese book. And from the beginning, she despises her name. She thinks that maybe it has created a path for her that she must go on that's full of tragedy and heartbreak. And so one of the main questions for her is, how can I escape the tragedy or the fate of my name? For both her name and the person associated with her name, as well as calligraphy, which is something she learns when she is in the city, and it serves as kind of a moral and philosophical framework for her as she's going through the events of the novel. Both of those things came to me as just, oh, what if I just put this in as a placeholder for now as I was writing? It was early on in the book, I thought this will be good to just put here for now, and maybe it'll work out. If it doesn't work out, I can come back and change it. I can always change her name, and I get to a point in the novel where she's been kidnapped. She's in a dark room, and I realize the journey that she is about to go on, this journey of going across the ocean in a bucket of coal, ending up in a brothel, somehow ending up in the American West. It is not an easy journey. And for a 13-year-old child to be able to make that journey and to survive it is kind of ludicrous without something to help her along the way. And that's when I decided, oh, her practice of calligraphy, as well as this kind of fraught relationship that she has with her name, those can be 2 things that are what also carry her through to the end. So those 2 things started out as just happenstances, and they ended up becoming crucial pillars of who this character is and how she is able to survive through a very hostile environment.
I think there's some lovely moments about how you use those, and with Nelson as well and his music, and how you use art as a way for people to make sense of the world.
Yeah, which is how we do it in our lives, right? We need some beauty, some kind of beauty. Yeah.
Do you do any calligraphy yourself, Jenny? Just had a question.
I do not. It was my grandfather who did it. And actually that was what inspired me to put it in. He would always, he'd be twitching his finger on his knee whenever he was sitting. And my mom told me it was because he was practicing writing the Chinese characters on his knee. So that's why I put it in. Yeah.
That's so nice. So nice. So both of your novels are set in very specific kind of historical periods. And I wanted to ask both of you how you went about creating a real kind of sense of time and place in that setting, whether there's anything specific that you did or something that you realized while you were writing. Jenny, I'll come to you first.
Yeah, I mentioned I started this book in 2019. I was finishing it right when the pandemic hit. So all my grand plans of going to visit the places where this novel is set, the Zhifu in China, which is now present day Yantai, Idaho, which I've never been to. Oh, well, I went to afterwards, and San Francisco, which I'd visited twice maybe. I had these grand dreams of going to visit and doing research and being on the ground and like smelling the air, and that just it couldn't happen due to the pandemic. So what I did then was just rely on our good old Google and the internet. It was just a lot of archival research, looking at people's scholarship across these books, of course, and using JSTOR, which I don't know if people are familiar with, but JSTOR was a big one. And interestingly, postcards of the time were very helpful, because even if photography was not as prevalent, people were illustrating things and drawing things on these postcards that were being sent. So that was very helpful. And, I got my MFA in Wyoming which is next to Idaho. It's not Idaho, but I was able to evoke the sense of what it feels like to be in a place that feels environmentally hostile, or like weather-wise feels hostile. So that was somewhat helpful in trying to understand what it might feel like to be in Idaho during the winter even.
Paddy, how about you?
Can I ask Jenny a little question?
Yeah, please do.
I wanted to know, and this is quite a broad question, but one that, as far as I can tell, rarely gets sort of. Sometimes when you're reading someone's book, you sort of can sense that they're enjoying themselves, that the writer is having fun, and I sense that. I don't know whether this is true, but maybe I sensed that with Jenny's book, and I wanted to ask her if writing makes you happy, if you enjoy doing it, and what it's actually, what our books share in common is that sense of movement, is going, that journey, and what that gives you as a writer, and how it sort of, and if it affects your life in a positive way.
Oh, I love that question. Yeah, it does, and it did, and it does. There would be moments where I would be writing, especially this sounds strange, but the scenes where she's at the brothel, I
Mm.
really derived so much joy from writing those scenes, not because of the brothel itself, but because she's surrounded by a company of women. And that's kind of the only time where she gets to have female relationships or friendships. And I just found myself blazing through those scenes because it was so fun and
Yeah,
easy for me to write.
yeah.
I don't know if you listen to music when you write, but I listen to music, and when I know I'm having fun is when I'm writing, and I also start singing to the music. I don't know. It feels like a full body like joy that you get.
Yeah, I mean, I don't listen to music, and I actually do the opposite. I sort of stopper both ears with ear defenders, or whatever they would be called. But I know that whatever that feeling is, that's so it sort of resists articulation, but there is a sort of filling up of some description. You feel bigger or better, or sort of more generous in some way than you do in reality. But it's nice to hear somebody else enjoys it, because normally it's all a bit doom and gloom.
Oh,
Um,
I know. That's kind of it's almost like a rite of passage that writing should feel hard and almost tragic and like it's suffering, but I don't know. I don't subscribe to that school of
no,
thought.
no, right. I think the more I do it, the more I feel that it's about some kind of accessing some kind of freedom that's not available in your own life. And that, I think everybody has, this is common for everybody. I'm sure that you get to a certain point, you think, well, surely this can't be it. I can't be trapped in this head for the rest of time. This sounds like, and everybody's got their way of dealing with that, whether that's writing or something completely different. But it turns into a strange kind of compulsion for me. I sort of no longer really, it seems like something I need to do rather than something I'd want to do. Anyway, we've digressed. We've gone off topic big time. I can't remember what I was meant to be talking about.
No, very enjoyably off topic. I'd actually like to pivot the conversation a little bit there and ask if there's anything that you'd like readers to feel, when they're reading or when they finish your novels. Is there anything you hope that they'd take away?
I think it's more that I think you just want them to feel, full stop. I'm not sure I think it would be a bit sort of pedantic if you'd want them to feel anything too specific. I think it's it's an amazing thing to be able to do, if you can do that. If I think Jenny probably does it for the same reasons, in that I'm sure you've read so many books that have made you feel a particular way, and what a privilege that is to be, hopefully, to be able to do that to somebody else. So yeah, as long as they feel something, even if they feel great hatred for it, I think there's something, there's something. It's not a bad thing necessarily. It's, if you're getting a reaction of some kind, then that's a bonus as far as I'm concerned.
Jenny, anything to add?
I think I would agree with that. I think at the beginning when the book came out, I was asked this question as well. And I said, I hope they feel a sense of hope or that they have learned something. But as I have had more distance from my book, I think that was just a way for me to impart some sort of control on something I could no longer control, right? So I
Mm.
really like your answer, Patty. I think any movement of emotion at all is you've done something. So I'm happy with that.
I'd like to add as well from what you said earlier, Paddy. Both of these novels, no matter how hard things are for the characters, they're really enjoyable still to read. And that comes across that both of you, it seems, were really enjoying writing them.
Yeah, I mean, I there would, yeah, I try and enjoy everything I do. As we were sort of saying, although I sort of don't really see the point otherwise. But yeah, it's a kind of, I don't know whether I'll do it. I sort of left the ending open, and maybe I thought about revisiting. I don't know whether I will, or maybe it will just remain that that unique experience where I sort of got to play around with language in a way that was a sort of real thrill for me. So I'm glad that that's conveyed to the reader.
What does this mean, do you think, for book 2 for you, Paddy? You've got such a distinctive voice in Yip for book 1.
Well, it's sort of Jenny's sort of touching on it. What she was just saying a moment ago is that your relationship to writing in general, or I find that it's changed hugely since I wrote this. So I have no. This is going to sound really blunt, but I don't have a great deal of interest in it once I've done it, and then you can move. And the next book, that is coming out next year, was as I would want it to be every time, was a completely different experience. I finished that in 10 weeks. It's set here. It's third person. It's set in the 1980s. It's a love story. So you couldn't get much more removed from it, which is as I say, is how I would want it to be. I want to keep surprising myself. I want to feel engaged in that way, and so yeah, I sort of don't think about it in that sense of leaving a voice behind. Yip was good to me, but I'm happy to put him to one side for now.
Jenny, is there a book 2 in the pipeline for you?
I am currently in the rough drafting stages, but I'm kind of in the same boat as you, Patty, of really just wanting to do something different. I don't think I'll return to historical fiction for a while, because I think it would be almost, not that the writing of it is easy, but it would be easy to stay with it, and having done it before. And the real challenge is to do something different, and to prove to yourself that you're able to do something different. And
exactly.
Yeah, I'm happy to leave this story where it is, and explore the ways in which I can test my skills as a writer, doing a different point of view, right? Doing a different voice. All of those things I think are more interesting to me than staying where I'm at.
Yeah, I think I completely agree. I think that's where something like a word like craft starts to sound particularly dangerous. I know a lot of people use it, but it kind of implies a sort of slow mastery of something, or that you were able to. There's a kind of formula that you're figuring out, whereas it sounds like we're both very much of the ilk of yeah, wanting to sort of stretch yourself, and the more uncomfortable you feel, maybe the better that is. At least we'd hope that.
Can I ask you a question related to that? I'm sorry, Georgie.
No, please go ahead.
I'm curious because if we think about, completing a project like a novel as a journey, do you feel comfortable viewing your novels as like a snapshot of where you are as a writer in that moment in time, knowing that it might not be 100% perfect to what you in the future might expect from yourself?
Yeah, I think that it's a good question. Yeah, I think that's what I'm sort of getting at earlier. I firmly believe that you do these things, and it kind of is what it is. And it might not be exactly how you want it to be. Certainly, these two that I've written are not exactly how I'd want them to be, and they don't feel perfect to me, and that they are flawed. But there's something about it's a really special thing, I think, if you engage with it in the right way of just sort of being in that moment, and giving yourself over to it. And I know this sounds ludicrous, and potentially people would say that this is evidenced, but I try not to think whilst I'm doing it. And by that, I don't mean that I'm just sort of like a lunatic scrolling. I mean you are trying to tap into some kind of portion of yourself that isn't really active or visible in any other part of your life. The only way I used to play a lot of sport, and it seems to me to be the exact same thing, is that if you are running around or if you have the ball in football, you're sort of dimly aware of what's going on, but basically things are happening beyond your control. And that, to me, is what's so deeply pleasurable about the experience, is that you do sort of give yourself over to some other power, it seems. That sounds terribly highfalutin, but you know what I'm getting at, I think.
It's an exercise in letting go as much as we are
Yeah.
controlling the actual everything.
Exactly. Yeah. It is that it's such a strange tension, because I think it's obvious to so many people who write that you're like a huge control freak, and I'm a terrible worrier, and was as a child, which is a kind of exercising of your imagination, or a strengthening of it in some ways, and you become very used to sort of looking at things consequentially in a certain pattern. So yeah, it's a weird thing. You feel desperate to control everything, and at the same time, there's this wonderful letting go of those things. So go figure. Who knows?
I'll have to come back and ask you the same question in 5 years, 10 years time.
Yes.
See how that changes.
I'm sure it'll be just as vague.
Not at all. If anyone does have questions, now is the time to pop them in the chat. In the meantime, I wanted to ask something about genre, which we've touched on a little bit. Jenny, you referred to Four Treasures of the Sky as historical fiction. When we were talking earlier, you said that it had been called a Western. I just wanted to know how you feel about your books, both of you, being assigned a genre, and whether you feel that they fit into those categories. Jenny, I'll come to you first.
Yeah, I mentioned this earlier, but I have never, before it was assigned to me, I never thought of my book as a Western, for so many reasons, but mainly because I never read about such stories in Westerns, and I didn't associate such stories with Westerns. One of the first interview requests I got for this book was someone wanting to know about how it fits within the Western genre. And I truly, like in a day, had to think through these issues. But I think what I've come to terms with is, despite me initially not really associating it with the Western, what I'm seeing now in American fiction, at least, is that there are a lot of kind of, they're not even revisionist versions of the Western. They're just telling what also existed in the West at the time, that previously these stories were not brought to light. You have C.P.M. Zhang's book, How Much of These Hills is Gold? You have Tom Lin's book, The Thousand Crimes of Ming Su. So all of these books that are also considered Westerns that exist within the same realm of bringing stories to light that previously have not been. And if that's what the Western has become, then I'm happy to be a part of the new Western. But Patty, I wanted to know, because yours is set in Georgia, which is not, like physically part of the American West. Were you
No.
thinking about the Western as a genre ever?
No, I'm exactly the same as you. I sort of don't buy into it, that those sort of labels as a reader, and I sort of resent them as a writer. I'm just not sure what they're meant to be doing. What makes even the idea of something being a historical fiction just seems odd to me. Why it wouldn't just be fiction makes no sense. But the way I would never consider my name is Yip to be a Western either. And I've been sort of slightly baffled by some questions I've had in the past regarding that. No, I suppose these are for other people to decide. Somehow you just do what you want. You do what you want to do, and you try and stay true to whatever that might be. And it seems to be other people that want to put a label on it.
I think that's fair enough. There are definitely things that correlate between the two of your novels, regardless of location. And that's really that both of them have really strong themes of identity, of home, of the pull of one's roots. And I wondered if there's anything that you could define in yourselves as writers, maybe why those are such strong themes in both of your works. Was it intentional from the beginning?
Those feel to me like, like basically all the big hitters. They're going to be in pretty much any work of fiction. It's a strange thing that I suppose, in one sense, that because it should be geographically so removed and so far divorced from my own reality, that these sort of feelings should come into it. It's a strange feeling, and I'm sure there's some deep latent problem that I have, that these things have manifested themselves in the form of a novel rather than in some other way. But I think, and I think this is, most writers tend to agree, that if you set out to include these sort of huge overarching themes, then you might as well shoot the thing dead, because it just doesn't work like that. Or if you do try and do that, what you're trying to do, and what you realize that you can do, is that you can sort of hit your target without really looking at it. And you sort of have this weird thing of where the closer you look at it, somehow the farther you're gonna wind up further away from where you wanted to be. We didn't really touch on research, but it's that same thing. I subscribe to that principle of you do the research you need to do, and then you forget about it, and then you put it somewhere to the back of your mind, because otherwise it would be, or at least it would be sort of overwhelming, and you would lose that sense of freedom and that sense of feeling lost, which I say can be, although it can be frightening, can be so salutary. So yeah, I think that's what I would say about that.
Someone asked you what My Name Is Yip is about, Paddy. What would you say?
I don't know whether this is what the book's about or whether how I felt doing it. As fear, it seems to me to be about that thing that we all have of living our lives on a day-to-day basis on a complete knife edge, and not knowing what would happen next, and not knowing what's around the corner that could potentially completely derail your existence. It's terrifying. I think it's terrifying, in so many ways. So that seems to be the engine behind it all. Is that you are sort of, in Yip's case, he is at the mercy of, of God, but you can, which I don't necessarily believe in, but I suppose, you're at the mercy of one thing or another. And it takes huge courage, I think, to go about your day-to-day life. I don't think that ever gets mentioned enough, but we're quite robust creatures. And yeah, exactly. But yeah, so I think that's the engine behind it. Wanting to make something out of what can sometimes be an incredibly difficult situation.
We are coming towards the end, but Jenny, I just want to give you a chance to answer that question as well. So in terms of those big themes, the pull of the roots, the home, the identity, could you answer why they're present in Four Treasures of the Sky?
Well, I think they're there because they are present in everything that I write. If you know, my short stories, my nonfiction, my essays, it's just always something, the question of identity, of home, of belonging, something that I have always thought about and tried to solve and understand and question. So it was really beautifully put, Paddy, when you said, if you're looking at the target, you can't hit it, or something to that effect, because I think I didn't set out to write a book about identity and belonging, and found family, but those things just emerge in my work and in my characters, because those are things I'm constantly thinking about and experiencing myself. So yeah, it just, I think, with my future books, things I write, they will just also be there. They will be in the fabric of my work forever.
And if we were to ask you what Four Treasures of the Sky is about?
I would say it's about a girl trying to find her own, trying to forge her path. To me, that's the journey, is that internal journey.
Brilliant. Thank you both so much for taking all of these questions so thoughtfully, and also for talking and asking each other questions about your fantastic books. So thank you everyone else for joining us. Thank you, Paddy. Thank you, Jenny, for taking the time to talk to us. So before we bid you adieu, Jenny, Paddy, is there anything you'd like to add?
Nothing of any great significance, just to thank you for such great questions, and and it's been lovely to talk and meet Jenny. So it's been a pleasure, and thank you for everybody who's tuned in, taken time out of their evening to listen to us witter on. So thank you.
I'll echo that. I wish that I could meet y'all in person, but this will have to do for now. And just thank you for letting this book be a part of it. Thank you to all the readers and the librarians out there.
Absolutely.
Agreed.
Thank you both so much. And Jenny, of course, we hope to meet you at some point in the future too. Thank you so much for being part of the event, and thank you to everyone who tuned in. So all that leaves me to do is to wish you all a lovely evening, Jenny, a lovely day ahead, and hopefully we'll see you all again soon. Goodbye.
Bye-bye.